Well, welcome everyone to today's webinar titled Bank Implementation, Why Leading Practices Matter to Corporations. This is Brian from Strategic Treasurer, and we're pleased you could join us as we discuss the challenges of bank implementation, as well as how to successfully navigate the process. Our speakers for today are Scott Graff, President of Prolific Banking, and Craig Jeffrey, Founder and Managing Partner of Strategic Treasurer. Welcome, Scott and Craig, and I'll now turn the presentation over to you.
Thank you so much, Brian. Welcome, everyone. Glad you're here. And Scott, it is good to present with you.
Thank you. Likewise.
Well, we know we have a lot to cover. We have a limited time with you. Thanks for sharing part of your day with us. So on the screen is our agenda. These are the topics that we're going to cover. What's the environment for onboarding? Who matters? If we think about banks, we think about the corporation, maybe it's a treasury group, maybe it's an AR area, maybe it's your trading partners. So we'll discuss what the onboarding environment looks like, because that has a significant impact on this whole idea of implementation. We'll spend some time on the pitfalls to avoid. If you've ever done implementations of services that are of any significant nature, you probably have some scars and war wounds and know of some of the pitfalls to avoid. We'll cover some of those and address what are some of the challenges to implementation. And then that'll be followed on what are some of the solutions? What are some of the ways, not necessarily cheat codes, but ways and leading practices to have a successful implementation? What are some of the best approaches to making it as smooth as possible? Change is inevitable. Change can be hard. How can we make it easy or easier? And then finally, we have a few key takeaways to cover. Scott and I will share 3 takeaways that summarize our discussion today. So that's what we're covering. We have a lot to go through. And that brings us to the context of implementation. I'll start off and then ask Scott to weigh in, as Scott is going to cover a lot of the content for today. So on this picture, you can see the bank and the company. Sometimes when we think about implementation, or maybe sometimes when you think about implementation, it's just the connection between your company and the bank. But that's, setup and onboarding goes beyond that. There's the whole universe inside the company, internal systems, as well as those third parties, your trading partners, your suppliers, your customers, and across the board. How do we consider the context of implementation? It can't just be at that point of intersection or interaction. It has to look at the process from a whole. And what we say, we must consider the comprehensive picture. And Scott, I'll invite you to just jump in here and expand on that. How should we be thinking about the context of implementation?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Craig. I love speaking with treasury professionals because a lot of times when we talk about onboarding and implementations to the rest of the world, it goes onboarding. Well, you open up an account, period. And the treasury professionals know just having an account really doesn't do you a whole lot. It's not a period, it's an ellipsis. What comes after you open that account? Well, it's all about the service and servicing of those services. And like you outlined prior, a company, just like at the bank, there are multiple back-end systems and processes and workflows. The same thing is going on at the corporate customer, the company. And of course, they're dependent on third parties. Is there an ERP or a TMS system? And so, it rapidly becomes a very complex system that needs to be orchestrated across the bank and, of course, their customer, their partner. So, when I talk as well to a lot of those external partners or parties that are working with companies, we talk about workflows and we talk about all of the things that are happening within that organization. And they typically leave out all of the workflow and everything else that's going on at the bank. And so, the trick for a successful implementation and to pull all this in context is to really take those business processes at the organization and the business processes that are, defined not necessarily all by the bank, but also from their regulatory entities, and really pull those together. And that's what we really mean by implementing treasury services at the organization. One additional piece that I'll share is that, it used to just be not always, but online access was the thing. As soon as I've set up an organization, they can administrate themselves. They can set certain things up. They can see their balances, transact, do all of those things. That's just really one pillar. As time moved on, we've gone from TTY to online. There's always that file transmission, whether we're talking about positive pay, notcha files, and whatnot. And nowadays, moving forward even more, there's APIs. There are developer portals. And so, we've always included, technology and operations within our implementations, but more and more, those lines they're really, really blurring depending on the capabilities of the supplier, the capabilities of the financial institution, and what the company is really trying to ultimately gain from the relationship.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. When you started talking about the background on the bank side, I just realized we drew a chart that will make sense from the company standpoint, the internal systems, external parties. There's a whole nother universe behind on the bank side of what needs to change, right? It's not just opening an account, it's connecting the different systems, a big world. So our comprehensive picture needs to become more comprehensive for sure. So thanks for that. On the bank onboarding, this is, what's involved in setting up a new customer. So if you're a corporation, this is your opportunity to put on your banker hat, if they have hats, to think about what is necessary for them, for you as a banker now to comply with what goes on. Things need to be set up, then services need to be turned on. There's a significant amount of activity on the bank side that needs to be done. And this is the beginning of that. So if the bank is a black box to you, we'll unpack some of that. So you'll be able to see a little bit behind on this. But Scott, why don't you take first crack at that? If you leave any items for me, I'll take those at the end.
Sure. And thank you. I'm going to kind of work from left to right, and I'll leave testing and validation. And please, if I leave any holes, jump in and help me out. When we talk about bank onboarding, we look at it holistically. South State looks at it very holistically, whether it's a net new relationship or it's an existing relationship where we're adding capabilities. If it is, and what I mean by that is, typically when we talk about KYC, that is know your customer, and KYB is know your business, and those go hand in hand, obviously, when we're talking about the organization. It's not always net new that we need to do KYC checks. As an example, I may be adding a signatory. Well, if I do that, I have to reach across all of those, signature cards, and I'm assuming that those would be digital. And I need to reach out to all of those entities, pull them back in, make sure they are who they say they are, and actually get them through some sort of papering process to approve what it is that's going on. KYC is really about knowing who's on the other end of the wire, and being able to validate that person. And you guys know this just as well as anybody. The fraud and some of the AI fraud out there makes it very, very challenging. So more and more systems and processes that really are weighing the banks heavily are through those KYC processes, and it's a defense in depth. There's a mix of patterns and things that need to be applied in order to have a successful KYC. Great, that makes things sound really hard. One of the things, and for example, even that South State is doing, is they're also putting these businesses through a KYB process. And it facilitates what's happening as it relates to the bank really knowing about the business and knowing that, this is a good actor and a good entity. Because nowadays you can go to the IRS website and look up EINs and get information back from it. There are several other types of databases that can be queried, and it really facilitates and streamlines that whole, I know the person I'm talking to on the other end of the line is a good guy. And then I also know that the business that I'm working with, I can actually look at it, pinpoint the corporate HQ. We're even pulling images back of the buildings. So real necessary for security, but within the context of onboarding, also streamlining that process so that we're not putting undue burden on our corporate customer. Talking a little bit about delegation of authority, there's several different pieces for that delegation. Not always is the signer of that corporate entity going to be the one working through the process. It could just be the CFO or controller that is actually going through and setting up these services. So making sure that you do have senior level approvals at the organization, but also we're enabling people who necessarily aren't signers to actually interact. When we talk about account configuration, there are certain accounts that can be set up for certain services where others should not be. I may not want you wiring out of your loan account, but I may want you wiring out of your line of credit account. Those types of things. So there's a whole lot of complexity that's happening on the bank side and filtering. South State's done a wonderful job as it relates to being able to filter the different account types along with the different types of services so that we're getting it right the first time instead of misconfiguring things on the back end, which typically protracts the onboarding process. Systems integrations and connectivity, something I spoke to a little earlier, whether we're talking about SFTP, digital certificates being exchanged, or if we're looking at API keys because we need to actually connect a third party with the API infrastructure. Products and services, getting the sales team involved, and it truly is a partnership where the sales team is reaching out to the treasury team or the practitioners team, really looking at the products and services aligned with what it is that they're trying to accomplish out of the relationship. And so having a very educated sales staff that has an understanding of what it takes to actually implement these products and services will also go ahead and give a good timeline and predictability for that onboarding process for their customer. And of course, we can't say anything, we can't diminish the security and compliance, right? We are regulated entities as financial institutions, and security is paramount. And all of these different points of interaction with the products and services and integrations, it gets to be a very complex skein. And more we're moving towards single sign-on with OAuth and patterns like OIDC, and that stuff does need to be set up as a part of onboarding. And I'll turn it over to you for the last two, Craig.
Sure, thanks, Scott. So, testing and validation, the process of testing throughout the build, and then finally when you get to transaction, there's a sense of we need to test it in reality. So we need the production value test. Maybe the system's up for a bit, you send very small dollar transactions through to make sure the process works, and you test every account, validate what's occurring, matches. This is crucial because even if almost everything's set up right, sometimes there are issues that come up. And so ensuring you have a good test plan, test case, and all of those are done from end to end. It's a joint responsibility. The bank does things, the corporation has a responsibility to make sure their testing is complete and it's validated. And then, onboarding, there's this idea of ongoing support that's well past onboarding. But when you go live, there's this, some people call it hypercare or particular care when something goes live to get the support, because that's when you're going to find out some of the smaller items that maybe didn't show up during testing to make sure you can move quickly and well as you've transitioned to a new bank or as you've made changes and are adding a service. So a lot of good stuff there. We could certainly spend more time on this, but that brings us to poll question slide number 1. It should show up on your screen. There are 2 questions. If you can't see both questions, enlarge the box by grabbing the corner and pointing it down. There's some instructions in the chat box that tells you if you have problems seeing the poll questions, what to do. First question is multiple choice. Select all that apply. What are your biggest challenges when you implement new bank services? List what you think are biggest challenges. If it's a minor challenge, don't put it down. Biggest challenges. The second one is, how frequently does your organization switch or add new banking services or providers? Mostly think about something significant service or providers. How often is that happening? And when you switch, is this like we don't ever switch, or we switch fairly regular? We have a disciplined process to do that. But go ahead and select those and hit submit. Once you're done, go ahead. We're going to say if we have 100 people type the word South State in the chat box, we'll send all the poll results. We have 2 slides and I think 3 or 4 results. So if you type South State, we'll send those out to everybody. So I only want to say it once when I get 100, but I do want Brian Weeks to count them up. So that's you can see a mean streak I have for that. I especially love when people type it in the Q&A box, so he has to go to multiple places to find it. This is good stuff. We love it. All right. Wow, that was fast. So that's come up. Scott, your quick feedback on the first one. Lengthy onboarding process, number 1 issue. Integration with existing systems, number 2. Both are identified by over half. And then we've got a bunch in the 30, 20, 21, and 22%. Any words on that top question?
Yeah, just that those are the usual suspects, the length of the onboarding process. And sometimes, as it relates to the length, it could be, confusion within the actual process of going from point A all the way to point B with a complex project. So having transparency into that is, I think, paramount, so that people know who's on first and who needs to, who's up next. And then, of course, that integration with existing systems. It's great for us to sit here and talk about all these APIs and great technologies and all these other things. The technology is here today to ease that level of integration. And I know that that's something that South State is rapidly working on.
Excellent. These categories, we obviously listed them. We know there's certainly issues for some people. The one thing that I would have thought would have been higher would be lack of IT resources. The lack of management support or capacity or lack of IT resources oftentimes show up as some of the biggest issues people face. This one shows up a little differently, so very interesting. And then I'll just leave the last item there, how frequently does your organization switch or add new banking services? We've got a pretty even split between 7 years or more, 4 to 6 years, 2 to 4 within 2 years. The number 1, of course, is the unsure, but it's a little skewed towards 2 to 7+ years. So not a lot of frequent movers. The depth of relationship matters, but when you move, it's going to be important, as we looked at those 2 questions. Stockpile. So the question comes up, what do you request? What are some of the items from the bank that help you have better project management? Now, Scott lives in this world. He does work on this all the time. I wanted to give him time to explain this. I know this is our last major slide, but we still have quite a bit to cover. So, Scott, have at it.
Absolutely. And I will not go through verbatim. So I'm going to talk more overarching to all 4 different topics. But, when we talk about, the documentation of bank services, what's available, it truly goes back to that consultative partnership between a financial institution and their corporate customer. What is trying to be achieved? What are the efficiencies? What are the products and services? Potentially even what is your competitive edge that an organization would have, by which we can go ahead and leverage our financial institution to make that happen, make that better. So having a very educated sales team, but also having documentation available to customers, so they can see what it is the products and services are that are being offered and the benefit value statements. Some of that does lead in a little bit to customer self-service, where a customer can actually go look at the quote unquote menu of services that a financial institution is offering. I know that things are being rolled out, especially at South State, on a regular basis, and then just having the population being aware of, oh, this is available, something I never thought about. We can take advantage of that. Implementation timeline, right? That popped up as I think that was the top, if memory serves, if not the top two. A lot of this, when you do select the products and services, is having that upfront, this is what it takes on average. But then even more than that, having SLAs tied not just at the bank, but also on the organization side. There was one instance where we were looking at a workflow, and it wasn't necessarily the bank that was lagging behind, quote unquote. It was typically the corporate customer, and that may actually lend itself to lack of IT staff and some of those things. So, recognizing where those delays are in the overarching process, and then reaching out, to our corporate customers, our partners, and saying, hey, can we come in and help facilitate? Maybe it's a technology thing, or maybe it's just this is a system that isn't used to being set up, and maybe we can help and facilitate with that. Integration capabilities and API documentation. This is where we get into developer portals, and I'm going to mix this one in with the testing environment as well. Having a developer portal, and just quickly, a developer portal is a place where a corporate customer can go, or business customer, onto the bank's website. They can look and see what capabilities are available via APIs, and they can also see what integrations are available. I may be using NetSuite or a G Treasury or a whatnot, and there could be connectors that are already set up, whereby I can simply enroll and onboard in that and pull my TM system directly in for balance reporting or payments or those types of things. But then also, the configuration and support around some of the supported formats, or, Nacha, ISO, those types of things, making sure that there's a streamlined, validated, and consultative certification process, which does go hand in hand with the testing environment. So I can be submitting my API calls, I can be running my information through my treasury management system, or I can be doing my Nacha files and validating and securing that prior to going live, some of the things we talked about earlier.
Yeah, thanks. And so we'll follow that up with, what are some of the sources of pain? What causes some of these challenges? So, lengthy onboarding timeline, that was, I think, number one. Another item is lack of transparency. Where are we? Where is the bank? Where's the corporation? Are people following through? And so that's where we oftentimes come up with a weekly check-in point. So why does it take so long on the onboarding side? Sometimes there's a lot of manual processes to get things set up. And at the corporate side, you're coordinating among a number of stakeholders. And that's also true on the bank side. There's usually a number of things, an operational system that's feeding a reporting system. Things have to be turned on, configured to work. And so the time can extend. And when this time for implementation extends, it creates this self-expanding reality. People pay less attention to it. And then it's like, okay, not much is happening here. They forget. And so what turns into weeks turns into months, turns into quarters. And we need to change that so that the source of pain, the lack of the implementation, which harms both parties, can be removed. Other items are integrations are difficult. Scott already talked about APIs, host-to-host connections. Sometimes we make one connection and the rest of the integration is someone looking at reports to make sure things went on. But this idea of making sure our tech is compatible, whatever level we want to get information or have feeds, that it works in the system, whether it's customized or hopefully it's more standardized, and we can have a more thoroughgoing, automated end-to-end process where feeds are happening as opposed to there's a manual injection or manual process that occurs. There's a few other items on here, the inadequate support or training. This is vital. I mean, the support and training should come from the bank for how you use the bank systems, but there's also internal change management that as corporate practitioners, whether you're an AP, AR, treasury, if you're running the project, you have to make sure that the team is ready to use the new services and features. Otherwise, they're going to use a subset of them, be less efficient, and sub-optimize the overall process. But every implementation involves change. Change can be a challenge. And the change also includes having one system up and running, a new system coming on board, and then there's this period of cutoff. And it's nice when the cutoff can be, 2 days later, everything gets cut off, but oftentimes we have trading partners involved in the process. So we have to be really diligent, not just celebrate when things go live, but hold some of that celebration off until the old is closed down. You've shut those off, you've turned the corner, and you've sunsetted systems, process, services that are no longer necessary. But this idea of change management, thinking through how that impacts everyone in a comprehensive manner, is vital. And that brings us, as we get closer to the end of our time, second poll question slide, third poll questions, factors in bank selection. What is the most important factor to your organization when selecting a bank to implement? So we're going to let everybody answer those. I'm going to advance the slide. Go ahead and answer those. Hit submit as soon as you're ready. I think just for purposes of time, Scott, if you could talk about some of the elements of successful implementation, pick a few. I may add some of them as here, but what makes successful implementation?
Yeah, absolutely. It is transparency in the process. Where are we? And the implementation. So, when we talk about a onboarding project, we talked about all the different complexities of the system for both the bank staff as well as their corporate customer, being able to see exactly where things are in the process with regular updates and clear communication. Also having an integrated communication link where it's easy for me to reach out to my project manager on the bank side if I'm a corporate practitioner. Digital and automated onboarding. This is one of the things where, forgive me, South State really shines. They have automated and digitized their onboarding process. So less mistakes, faster turnaround time when it comes to implementing service, where we're taking that information, gathering it from the customer, and we're actually having computers go and onboard into the back-end systems. The comprehensive view really comes into play for not just transparency, but also senior management. The worst case scenario is somebody goes on vacation and drops the ball. But having a team whereby multiple people, both at the organization and the financial institution, can see where they are in that process. Documented internal processes. That's also one of the things when you digitize your onboarding and you automate it, it's a standardized process where you're not writing notes in the margin based on a particular customer. It's actually something that is standardized and can be adapted and changed as things go. And I'll take the last two, please. Yes.
Yeah, I think what we'll do is these slides will be sent to everybody. You can see some more items. Just for purposes of time, we're going to jump to final thoughts. So certainly more to talk about here. Scott, thanks for stepping through those. We'll let people read the other components that I was going to go through, but why don't we go through this? Scott, why don't you start and I'll finish our final thoughts.
Absolutely. Loving that change is inevitable, whether we're talking about new products and services or new ways to have technology and capabilities and connectivity and all of those things. It's only continuing to accelerate. It's an exciting time because there are tons of opportunity, but that does mean that we need to be stewards of our onboarding process and making sure that we don't lose sight of the hard part, which is typically turning on and maintaining those types of services.
Yeah, excellent. The second pillar there is the impact can vary. Any implementation can be great, it can be okay, or it can be bad. Depends on how you approach it, how you work through the challenges. We've given you a number of the key areas for successful implementation to make sure that more of your projects are great. And then finally, part of that being great is what must be managed effectively. That's essential. Communication is part of change management. In our view, making sure that everyone's involved in what's changing, what's expected of them when you're going live, when you're cutting over. And part of doing that is making sure you have a clear blueprint for those cutover paths. And having a clear blueprint requires this comprehensive or holistic view of what's happening both between you and the bank or between you and your customer, and then between your trading partners for the corporate and then the bank within those different areas. All that requires good coordination and a key focus. So thank you to South State. Thank you, Scott, for stepping through this, and thank each of you for listening. I know we went through a lot of material really quickly, and thanks for your attention. And we did get enough. We'll be sending all the poll results out. We'll turn it back over to Brian.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. The CTP credits, today's webinar slides, and a recording of today's webinar will be sent to you within 5 business days. And for more on effectively managing implementations in Treasury, be sure to download the Treasury Technology Analyst Report by clicking the link in the chat box. Thank you, and we hope you have a good rest of the day.